This is the second of 3 videos on procurement planning and budgeting. In this video, we focus only on the annual procurement plan, known by its short form, APP. The Project Procurement Management Plan, the PPMP, was covered in the previous video, and the approved budget for the contract, the ABC, is covered in a separate video after this one. This video also connects back to market scoping, which we covered in its own separate video. Since the price and cost figures that ultimately appear in the APP originally come from that market scoping exercise, by way of the individual PPMPs that get consolidated into it. Let's begin with the APP. Part B Annual Procurement Plan, APP. Legal basis, required contents, consolidation timeline, contract splitting, checklist, and audit findings. Let's begin. Next slide. Legal basis, Section 7.7.2. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from the Implementing Rules and Regulations of Republic Act No. 12,009, Section 7.7.2. Quote: the indicative PPMPs shall be submitted to the relevant offices of the procuring entity for evaluation of their merit for inclusion in the budget proposal, then forwarded to the BAC Secretariat for consolidation into an indicative APP. For this purpose, the indicative APP shall include a. Name of procurement project, b. End user or implementing unit, c. General description, d. Procurement modes to be adopted, e. Criteria for bid evaluation, f. Schedule of activities, g. Source of funds, h. ABC, I. Whether through EPA, j. Procurement strategies or tools, and k. Other relevant descriptions. End quote. Notice how much richer this list is compared to the 7 items required for a single project procurement management plan. That is because the annual procurement plan is a consolidation covering every project across the entire office or local government unit, so it needs extra fields, such as bid evaluation criteria and whether early procurement activities will be used. Next slide. Legal basis, Section 7.7.5. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from the Implementing Rules and Regulations of Republic Act No. 12,009, Section 7.7.5. Quote: as soon as the GAA, Corporate Operating Budget, or Appropriation Ordinance becomes final, the end-user or implementing unit shall finalize the PPMPs to reflect the authorized budgetary allocation. The finalized PPMPs shall be submitted to the BAC Secretariat for consolidation into the final APP, recommended by the BAC for approval of the HOPE. The approved final APP shall be posted on the website of the procuring entity and submitted to the GPPB on or before the end of January of the budget year. End quote. Pay close attention to exactly what this section requires for posting, because, as the next slide explains, this exact wording has been misquoted before in ways that could mislead an audit. Next slide. Important correction to a prior citation. A prior internal reference cited a 5-day fill GEPS posting rule for the APP that does not exist in the Implementing Rules and Regulations. That earlier reference quoted Section 7.7.5 as requiring the final APP to be posted in the fill GEPS within 5 calendar days from its approval, and cited this as a direct quotation. This sentence does not appear anywhere in the official The Implementing Rules and Regulations text. The verified text of Section 7.7.5 requires only posting on the procuring entity's website and submission to the GPPB on or before the end of January of the budget year. This guide uses only the verified wording. The earlier citation should no longer be used in any audit finding or training material. Getting a citation wrong is not a small thing in a compliance document, because a wrong legal citation can travel from one audit report to the next for years before anyone catches it. This is exactly why every quotation in this guide has been checked directly against the original source text. Next slide. Definition and purpose. Point 1. The APP is the consolidated procurement plan of an entire procuring entity for one fiscal year, prepared by the BAC Secretariat from all PPMPs submitted by end-user units. Point 2. Once approved by the HOPE, the APP becomes the master authorization document for every procurement activity the procuring entity may lawfully undertake that year. Point 3. Consolidation serves 3 purposes: a single comprehensive view for the BAC and HOPE, BAC recommendation of the appropriate mode per project, and operationalizing the Section 7.8 rule that no procurement proceeds without it. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of definition and purpose. Next slide. Required contents of the indicative APP, Section 7.7.2, Part 1. A. C. Name, unit, description. Specific and descriptive, never a vague catch-all like various supplies. D. E. Modes and evaluation criteria. State the mode under Section 26, state LCRB, MIR B, or other applicable criterion. F. G. Schedule and source of funds. Specific months per activity, specific fund source. Keep each of these items in mind as a required element, not an optional one. Next slide. Required contents of the indicative APP, Section 7.7.2, Part 2. H, I, ABC and EPA indication. Consistent with the PPMP ABC, if EPA must not exceed the indicative APP amount. J, K, strategies and other info. Framework agreement, pooled procurement, or other relevant descriptions, if applicable. Keep each of these items in mind as a required element, not an optional one. Next slide. Indicative APP versus final APP. This table reads as follows. Feature, when prepared, indicative APP, before budget approval, Section 7.7.2, final APP, after appropriation ordinance final, Section 7.7.5. Next row. Feature, triggers procurement. Indicative APP, only for EPA, short of award, Section 12.1 to 12.4. Final APP, yes, basis for the entire fiscal year. Next row. Feature, submission requirement. Indicative APP, posted on website for EPA purposes, Section 7.7.4. Final APP, posted on website. Submitted to GPPB by end of January, Section 7.7.5. Use this table as a direct lookup reference whenever you need to check indicative app versus final app. Next slide. Consolidation process and submission timeline. Step 1. Submit indicative PPMPs. End-user units submit for evaluation of merit, Section 7.7.2. Step 2 to 3. BAC consolidates and recommends mode. BAC Secretariat consolidates. BAC recommends mode to the HOPE. Step 4 to 5. Revise for budget, EPA. Revise per Section 7.7.3. Updated indicative APP posted for EPA per Section 7.7.4. Step 6 to 7. Finalize and consolidate final APP. Finalize PPMPs per Section 7.7.5. BAC Secretariat consolidates the final APP. Step 8 to 9. HOPE approves, post and submit. HOPE approves, posted on website and submitted to GPPB by end of January. Follow these steps in order, since each one builds on the step before it. Next slide. Revision of the APP. Point 1. Section 7.9 allows proposals for additional PPMPs or changes to existing PPMPs as often as necessary. Point 2. Revision is typically needed when a new project is needed, the ABC changes significantly, the mode of procurement must change, a supplemental budget adds projects, or a project is cancelled and funds reprogrammed. Point 3. Because Section 7.8 makes the approved APP a strict precondition. A project not yet in the APP cannot lawfully proceed to any procurement step until the APP is formally revised and approved by the HOPE. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of revision of the app. Next slide. Prohibition on splitting of government contracts. Here is the legal basis, quoting directly from the Implementing Rules and Regulations of Republic Act No. 12,009, Section 39.1. Quote. Splitting of government contracts is not allowed. In using any of the modes of procurement under Article 4 of the Act, the procuring entity shall ensure that this does not result in splitting of government contracts, which involves dividing or breaking up of contracts into smaller quantities and amounts, or dividing contract implementation into artificial phases or subcontracts for the purpose of evading or circumventing the requirements of the Act and this implementing rules and regulations, provided that procurement per unit by lot or package, is allowed subject to the available budget, required quantity, product availability, delivery sites, geographical location and market capacity." End quote. Contract splitting is one of the most serious integrity concerns in procurement, because it is almost always done deliberately, to slip a large project under a lower procurement threshold that requires less scrutiny. Later in this guide, in the section on clustered projects, you will see a closely related concept, evaluating a single contract's cost as if it were several smaller ones to obtain a more favorable result. Next slide. APP document checklist. Point 1. All PPMP items consolidated into one document per approved budget, with no project omitted. Point 2. Each project on a separate line, no combining of unrelated projects. Point 3. ABC for each project consistent with the corresponding PPMP. Point 4. Mode of procurement appropriate for the ABC and applicable classification. Point 5. Schedule columns filled in with specific months or quarters. Point 6. Source of funds clearly identified for each project. Point 7. Marked clearly as indicative or final. Point 8. Recommended by the BAC, with BAC resolution, and approved by the HO-PE. Point 9. Approved final APP posted on the website and submitted to the GPPB by end of January. Taken together, these points give you the practical, working picture of app document checklist. Next slide. Finding number 1. Procurement conducted for a project not in the APP. A disbursement was made for a procurement activity that does not appear in the approved APP or revised APP for the fiscal year concerned. The legal basis for this finding is the Implementing Rules and Regulations Section 7.8, Presidential Decree No. 1445, Section 4(1). Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 2. Final APP not submitted to the GPPB by the deadline. The final APP was approved well before end of January but was not actually submitted to the GPPB by that deadline, or the submission date cannot be established. The legal basis for this finding is the Implementing Rules and Regulations Section 7.7.5. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 3. APP contains round number ABCs without support. Multiple projects show round number ABCs with no supporting price canvas sheet or market scoping documentation. The legal basis for this finding is the Implementing Rules and Regulations Section 7.7.2 H and Section 10. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 4. Contract splitting evident in the APP. A single project genuinely worth a larger amount was listed as multiple smaller entries, resulting in use of small value procurement instead of the competitive bidding otherwise required. The legal basis for this finding is the Implementing Rules and Regulations Section 39.1. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 5. APP not revised before additional procurement. A project was procured despite not being part of the original APP, with no revised APP prepared, recommended, and approved before the activity began. The legal basis for this finding is the Implementing Rules and Regulations Section 7.8 and Section 7.9. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 6. APP not consolidated from actual PPMPs on file. APP entries cannot be traced back to any corresponding PPMP submitted by an end-user unit. The legal basis for this finding is the Implementing Rules and Regulations Section 7.7.1 and Section 7.7.2. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. Finding number 7. APP missing required BAC recommendation or HO-PE approval. The APP lacks either the BAC resolution recommending approval or the HO-PE's signature approving it. The legal basis for this finding is the Implementing Rules and Regulations Section 7.7.2 and Section 7.7.5. Auditors look for this pattern because it usually signals that a required planning or documentation step was skipped rather than genuinely completed. The practical safeguard is to always ask for the specific supporting document before accepting the figure at face value. Next slide. This concludes our discussion of the annual procurement plan. To recap, the APP is the consolidated procurement plan for the entire procuring entity, built from every end-user unit's PPMP, and no procurement may lawfully proceed without an approved APP behind it. In the next and final video of this series, we move on to the approved budget for the contract, the ABC, where we will also look closely at how market scoping feeds directly into that figure. Thank you for watching. This is the second of 3